A hush fell over the Grand Council chamber as the twin moons of Coruscant cast silvery beams across polished black obsidian floors. Shadows danced along vaulted ceilings where portraits of the Emperor's triumphs stared down in quiet witness. At the center of this solemn hall, a circular dais of dark stone curved beneath a ring of starlight, an unspoken promise that no secret could hide from the Imperial gaze. It was here, on the eve of a new era, that Supreme Chancellor Palpatine would decree the birth of the Imperial Security Bureau, a clandestine arm designed to enforce loyalty through fear and subterfuge. Palpatine's voice, smooth as liquid night, echoed through the chamber's stillness. "Corruption festers in hidden corridors," he intoned, glancing at a retinue of robed ministers whose expressions flickered like hollow projectors. "To cleanse the Empire, we require more than stormtroopers and star destroyers. We need eyes everywhere." With that, he raised a slender gloved hand, and a cluster of crimson-sealed dossiers materialized before each minister. The seals glowed with an ominous red that pulsed like a heartbeat, suggesting the gravity of their contents. Behind the lofty figures, a cadre of black-suited agents awaited instruction. Their uniforms were austere, trimmed in blood-red piping, and their visors reflected the council's arches like twin pools of liquid metal. Each agent held a dossier. These were not mere reports, but keys to power. Dossiers filled with whispered rumors, intercepted communications, and the names of potential traitors. Their presence was a statement. Secrecy and suspicion would supplant truth and trust. Within hours, Palpatine's edict rippled outward through every echelon of Imperial governance. Generals found confidential memos detailing subtle deviations in protocol. Provincial governors received encrypted warnings about disloyal elements within their administrations. Even high-ranking bureaucrats discovered invitations to clandestine interviews in shadowed antechambers. No one was exempt. Agents moved like ghosts, slipping through atriums and offices, their footsteps muffled against mosaic tiles. On Ryloth, a jewel of the Outer Rim, Governor Saretha watched stormtroopers dismantle a labor union meeting after an anonymous tip. A humid wind carried the distant wail of protesters as pyrotechnic charges cleared council halls. Back on Coruscant, an aide to a senior minister vanished overnight, leaving behind only a flickering comm badge and an opened dossier. Rumors suggested temporary reassignment, but whispers among palace servants spoke of interrogation centers buried beneath the Senate spires. Within the ISB's embryonic cryptanalysis division, officers pored over stolen data pads, decrypting rebel cell chatter intercepted near isolated star systems. Illuminated only by pale hollow screens, they traced coded signatures back to suspected sympathizers. Word of betrayal became currency. Even the mention of a colleague's secret meetings could trigger a midnight summons. Some agents reveled in their newfound power, while others slipped into corridors with haunted eyes, burdened by the knowledge that every whisper might betray a friend. Yet, beneath the veneer of absolute control, a subtle tension began to throng. The Emperor's spies thrived on uncertainty, and uncertainty bred paranoia. Council members spoke in hushed tones, distrusting aides whose gazes lingered too long. Stormtrooper commanders grew wary of anomalies in chain-of-command transmissions. The ISB's reach was vast, but trust, once fractured, proved far harder to restore. In a quiet alcove of the palace's deepest level, the ISB's first director, Grand Moff Arcturus Inquis, observed the ripples of his creation. His face, framed by cold steel hair, showed satisfaction, but also the faintest crease of doubt. He had been tasked with loyalty's ruthless guardianship, yet he wondered, when all secrets were exposed, what value remained in truth? Above, the starlit chamber's arches hummed with cosmic indifference. For the Emperor, suspicion was a tool as precise as any lightsaber. And so the Imperial Security Bureau was born, not in fire and battle, but in whispers and shadows. Its agents would weave a web so intricate that every thought, every whisper, might serve the Empire's inscrutable will. And beneath those twin moons, an age of fear took root, destined to choke the last embers of rebellion. Unless hope could flicker through the darkness. A low hum rose from the assembly lines of the Coronite foundry, where conveyor belts spat molten metal into gleaming hull plates. The air tasted of oil and ozone, and every footstep rang hollow against the polished steel walkways. Here, among the rhythmic clinks and the hiss of cooling drones, Chancellor Palpatine's latest edict found its fertile ground. Each citizen was a potential asset, eyes and ears for the Imperial Security Bureau. Jera Tallinn, a machinist with grease-smeared overalls and tired shoulders, hunched over a workbench littered with sparking welders. She had never imagined herself as a spy, yet today her pocket was swollen with Imperial credits, 3 glimmering coins for every hint of disloyalty whispered into the agent's crackling vox-com. The reward was tempting. Extra rations, a chance for her sick child's medical supplies, a fleeting taste of safety in a galaxy devoured by suspicion. Between frames, she glanced at her foreman, a hulking man whose loyal smile never reached his eyes. Each nod he offered in the supervision chamber held a fraction more scrutiny than the last. The ISB had embedded itself in every tier of labor, dangling promises and threats in equal measure. One misstep, a whispered gripe about rations, a whispered prayer for the Jedi, could earn a summons to anonymous interrogations deep beneath Coruscant's spires. On the factory floor, Jera's partner, Dalen Sorn, whispered about the strange new inspections. Gears whirred as his hand brushed a freshly minted plate. She nodded, allowing his words to slip into her concealed datapad's recorder. The device, no larger than a personal holo reader, pulsed in her palm like a secret heartbeat. Credit chips clattered as she dropped them into her pocket, each one a silent promise of her complicity. Above them, the mezzanine hummed with activity. A pair of ISB officers in tailored grey uniforms scanned handwritten logs, their expressionless visors reflecting the glow of overhead lamps. One officer, his sidearm holstered, flicked through the factory's personnel roster, marking names with a delicate stylus. The other leaned over a datapad, reading Dalen's recent absence from shift. They exchanged no words. Trust was measured in protocol, not conversation. Jera's breath shivered at the thought of discovery. She recalled the whispered tale of Taran Kriss, a loader who voiced solidarity with the rebels. His fate had become cautionary legend, stripped of rank, exiled to uninhabited moons, left to starve in the wastelands. Now, every co-worker's glance felt like a hidden accusation. In crowded corridors, eyes flicked sideways, searching for the telltale shine of credit chips in her pocket. Late that evening, after the final shift siren faded, Jera slipped through the foundry's back exit. The alley beyond was bathed in neon tubes that sputtered like dying stars. She approached a narrow alcove where a holocom flickered with the Imperial crest. A slot in the wall welcomed her datapad. She placed it within the cavity. The device slid in with a soft click, vanishing into the Bureau's ravenous network. A moment later, a compartment spat out 3 golden credits. The reward felt hollow in her trembling hand, yet she held it out like an offering to her own survival. In that instant, she understood the ISB's cruel genius. Build fear with one hand, add desire with the other. Her children would eat, her conscience would ache. But one more broadcast from Coruscant assured that each token bought her family another night's safety. Days passed, and Jera's reports multiplied. Her data streams wove into the Bureau's expanding tapestry of control. Plant supervisors were replaced, union organizers arrested, entire shifts reshuffled on phantom charges. The foundry's rhythms grew uneven, workers' morale fractured. Suspicion became the new production metric, friendships fractured in the pursuit of loyalty. Then, one dawn, Dalen vanished. No announcement, no dossier, just an empty workstation and the dull echo of machinery. Jera pressed a hand to her mouth as memories of whispered conversations flooded back. Guilt coiled inside her like a living thing. Would her next payment weigh against a friend's life? Would the credits she pocketed ever buy her redemption? Above the factory, the first cruiser-class transports roared into orbit, carrying fresh directives from the Emperor himself. The ISB's web stretched across star systems, threads that reached into every civilian heart. For operatives like Jera, each whisper meant a transaction of life for fear, trust for credits. And as the foundry's gates clanged shut behind her, she realized that even in this sea of iron and flame, loyalty remained the rarest alloy. The marble halls of the Imperial Senate gleamed under artificial starlight, each polished column a monument to Palpatine's consolidation of power. Here, in the nerve center of the galaxy's governance, loyalty was currency and betrayal a silent blade. Behind rostrums and red banners, the Imperial Security Bureau wove its subtle influence, ensuring that every decree advanced the Emperor's hidden design. Emilia Voss, once the trusted personal aide to Senator Ral Hax, moved with purposeful composure through the corridors. She paused before her former charge's office, adjusting her gloves as if to mask the tremor in her fingers. Her eyes, once bright with political idealism, now surveyed each passing face with a calculation honed by her new masters. The nameplate outside the door lay ready to be changed. Voss, E, to Trudex Security Asset number 045. In that single rotation, the balance of power would tilt ever more irrevocably toward the ISB. Within the senatorial suite, Ral Hax had spent decades championing agricultural reforms for Outer Rim worlds. His voice once carried the hope of countless farmers. Now it would echo to empty chairs. As Voss entered, she noted the senator's stacks of policy briefs, proposals marked urgent, green-lighted for debate, yet doomed to irrelevance. The Bureau's mandate was not to serve the Senate, but to ensure its compliance. She seated herself at the aide's desk, sliding the old datapad aside. Under the guise of organizing the day's schedule, she inserted a micro-transmitter beneath the hollow communications console. Its red LED blinked once, then dimmed, ready to broadcast every whispered conversation and private vote to the ISB's vaults. Nearby, on a polished shelf, Voss arranged a personal holoframe of the senator's family, a final gesture of courtesy before her transformation into a surveillance node. The afternoon session convened, and the hum of debate rose like a distant storm. Senator Hax rose to speak, his voice resonant yet carrying an edge of fatigue. He argued against excessive taxation on emerging mining colonies, a stance that threatened the interests of House Hathin, a known Bureau collaborator. Unseen by the gallery, Voss watched Hax's every gesture, her ears attuned to shifts in tone. She tapped a code on the transceiver, flagging the senator's remarks for immediate ISB review. In the gallery above, shrouded figures in muted grey uniforms slipped through side passages, exchanging nods with hidden assets.
They were the Bureau's shadows, ghosts of authority who moved unseen, passing dossiers sealed with crimson wax. Each file contained compromat, financial records, or scandalous rumors, primed to neutralize any official who dared defy imperial decree. As Hax concluded his address, Voss rose smoothly and followed him into his private anteroom. Their footsteps echoed against the marble floor, punctuated by the soft click of her heels. "Senator," she began, offering a datapad marked "Urgent" from the ISB. His eyes flicked to the seal, hesitation rippling across his features. This was the moment when compliance became coercion. Unseen by him, Voss tapped a concealed panel and deactivated the comlink to the main chamber, ensuring the senator's response would never reach sympathetic allies. She watched, impassive, as Hax's expression shifted from indignation to resignation. Outside, the gallery lights dimmed, signaling a recess. In that lull, the Bureau's influence tightened like a noose. Later, when the session resumed, an assistant, her replacement, stood beside Hax, offering his notes with unwavering deference. The new aide's calm efficiency contrasted sharply with Voss's earlier warmth. Each time the senator paused, the assistant supplied the precise talking points that aligned with Palpatine's unspoken will. It was a seamless takeover, executed without rancor or spectacle. By nightfall, Voss slipped away through a service exit, her silhouette melting into Coruscant's neon mist. Behind her, the aide's desk bore no sign of the intruder. The hollow frame still glowed with the senator's family portrait, a ghostly reminder of what had been lost. The nameplate on the door now read simply, Senator Ral Hax, yet beneath it, the true power resided with the ISB's loyal asset. Far above, in the Bureau's clandestine headquarters, officers reviewed their new intelligence feed. Every vote, every concession, every hesitation would now be catalogued and leveraged. The Senate, once a beacon of representative governance, had become a puppet theater, each marionette string held by the unseen hands of ISB operatives. As the city's domes dimmed for the night, one truth endured. The Emperor's secret police were not merely hunters of traitors, they were architects of obedience. In every council chamber, behind every closed door, they stood watch. And in a universe built on trust and unity, their silent presence sowed fear, ensuring that power would remain in the shadow of the dark throne. In a vaulted chamber beneath the city's glittering spires, the Imperial Security Bureau's cryptanalysis division thrummed with quiet urgency. Here, far from the Senate's pomp and the Inquisitors' hunts, pale-eyed linguists and codebreakers bent over hollow consoles, their faces bathed in the ghostly glow of encrypted data. Each keystroke snapped the silence, a staccato heartbeat in the stillness of midnight. Only hours earlier, a concealed listening post near Anoat had captured a burst of rebel chatter, a fragmentary plea for aid, woven through static and subspace echoes. Now, aboard Coruscant's silent underlevels, those raw signals were reborn as streams of unfamiliar characters. Flickering holoscreens projected vast arrays of glyphs, each symbol a cipher hiding the spark of a burgeoning revolt. Lieutenant Nalara V, overseer of this clandestine cell, moved among the workstations with measured grace. Her uniform bore the subtle silver trim of senior rank. Her expression remained unreadable, but her eyes flickered with keen intensity. Pausing by a circular hollow visor, she traced a flowing line of emerald script, adjusting its velocity as it scrolled across the field. "Increase decryption matrix by 12%, she murmured. We must peel back their layers before dawn. At one terminal, Ensign Tero Jan leaned forward, lips moving silently as he mapped each recurring pattern. His fingers danced across the console, isolating code clusters that pulsed with rebel urgency. "These frequencies correspond to independent cells on Boreas and Ryloth," he said, voice low and focused. "They're coordinating simultaneous uprisings." A soft chime rang through the chamber, a warning that a new batch of intercepts had arrived. Technicians in curved rows of desks activated additional channels, the green text multiplying like vines across every screen. The room brightened, as though a second dawn had broken in this subterranean sanctum. Despite the proliferation of data, no one spoke above a hushed whisper. Each bit of information felt sacred, a secret lifeline to the Empire's stability. V regarded the incoming transmissions, noting the subtle inflections in tone and cadence. Beyond raw syntax, there lay the cadence of hope, the tremor of fear, the undercurrent of rebellion. She tapped a command that fed the decrypted fragments into a central archive, where higher-ranking analysts would assess the threat. This was not mere surveillance. It was preemptive dominion, a way to choke dissent before it could spark into open revolt. Meanwhile, on a raised dais at the center of the chamber, a master decryption unit hummed with stored processing power. Its lens-like array scanned each transmission in parallel, cross-referencing with captured rebel hollows and prison logs. V approached, resting a hand on its cool metallic surface. "Initiate correlation analysis," she ordered softly. A pale beam of light flickered along the device's core, signaling the weaving together of countless data threads. Across the room, a junior officer hesitated over a fragment of audio, a trembling voice pleading for a medical transport on Anoat. "Sir," she ventured, "they mention Clan Ursil's insignia. That could link them to dissident elements on Raxus Prime." Without waiting for confirmation, she cued the snippet for immediate cataloguing. V gave a subtle nod, acknowledging both the officer's initiative and the imperative of swift action. As the clocks ticked toward morning, the chamber's tension deepened. The encrypted patterns, once a jumbled cacophony, began to resolve into coherent directives, supply routes, rendezvous points, names of sympathizers within the Senate. Each revelation tightened the Bureau's noose around insurgent cells. No crumb of rebellion could remain hidden. Finally, after hours of relentless focus, Jan whispered, "We have the launch code for the Ryloth insurgent fleet." He keyed a rapid sequence that synthesized the decrypted command into a secure file. V accepted it and sent an encrypted burst directly to a strike command aboard the Star Destroyer Terra's Hand. In the cold glow of the holoscreen, the lights of distant hyperspace lanes mapped out the path of impending suppression. With the dawn approaching over Coruscant's domes, V allowed herself a brief exhalation. The chamber's ambient hum continued, but for a moment, victory tasted like chill metal on her tongue. "Excellent work," she said quietly. "Dispatch the intercept orders. Ensure every rebel cell is neutralized before they can mobilize." As agents in shadowed alleys across the galaxy readied their actions, the Cryptanalysis Division's screens dimmed in readiness for the next wave of intercepts. Each flicker of green script remained a reminder that knowledge was the Empire's deadliest weapon. And here, in this underground crucible, fear was forged one decrypted message at a time. And though Coruscant's glittering skyline would soon awake to a new day, in these silent depths, the ISB's unseen eyes never slept. So long as whispers of insurrection lingered, Codebreakers would remain, unseen, unwavering, and ever vigilant. A week after the cryptographers delivered their breakthroughs, the ISB turned its gaze outward, where the winds of dissent fanned flickers of rebellion into flames. On the desert world of Sulut, under a sky stained orange by 2 dying suns, unrest had taken root among miners and farmers alike. Rumors of malnourished laborers, harsh quotas, and unexplained disappearances circulated in hushed tones. The Imperial Security Bureau arrived not with blasters drawn, but with dossiers, thick files filled with whispered accusations and coerced confessions. Governor Riv Soren, once a decorated war hero, now found himself under the Bureau's unflinching scrutiny. A loyal servant of the Empire him until reports from local informants suggested he had sheltered sympathizers, diverted ration shipments, and turned a blind eye to smuggled weapon caches. Such treason, in Palpatine's unyielding code, demanded a demonstration of fear, swift, public, irreversible. At dawn, the twin suns cast long shadows across Sulut's capital plaza. Propaganda posters, depicting imperial eagles soaring over contented crowds, fluttered, their edges singed by stray embers from last night's executions. Local laborers stood at their stalls, hands trembling as they tore the images down, offering them to ISB agents waiting in trench coats. Every peeling poster signaled the collapse of hope, replaced by a stark decree, loyalty or oblivion. High above, the governor's palace rose like a pale citadel. Its marble columns, once symbols of stability, now gleamed with an ominous glare. ISB enforcers, in coal-black uniforms, marched through ornate archways, their boots thudding in exact rhythm. Sirens, barely louder than a whispered threat, echoed through the corridors. In the central courtyard, a dais had been hastily erected, a stage for terror disguised as justice. Soren stepped onto the platform, his uniform crisp, despite the tension in his shoulders. His voice, rehearsed and measured, addressed the gathered crowd. Imperial law is absolute. My actions. He barely managed to finish before Commander Halon Rek, the ISB's local chief, raised a gloved hand. A crimson-sealed dossier appeared in Rek's grip. Your actions speak otherwise, Governor. Rek's tone was cool, devoid of mercy. At his command, armored troopers seized the governor's arms, dragging him to kneel. Soren's jaw clenched as the sun crept higher, illuminating the horror on every pale face in the square. The preacher minister, once his staunchest ally, now stood at the microphone. By decree of the Emperor and the Imperial Security Bureau, Riv Soren is condemned for sedition. Let his fate serve as a warning to all. A single flare discharged, the blue-white burst of a blaster cutting through the morning haze. The echo rolled across the plaza, silencing traders and beggars alike. Bodies slumped with a final, silent gasp. The hush that followed was heavier than the blast itself, a vacuum of dread. No sobs rose from the crowd, only the rustle of surrendering banners drifting in the heat. Even as lifeless forms were carried away, ISB scribes recorded every detail. The governor's last defiant glare, the moment his knees buckled, the shock that rippled through quiet spectators. Each data point fed into the Bureau's voracious database, adding another thread to the tapestry of fear. By midday, Sulut's markets had emptied. Workers returned to their posts under watchful eyes, each glancing at shadow-cloaked agents stationed at every intersection. The orange sky seemed to burn more fiercely, as though the planet itself had absorbed the cruelty of execution. In taverns and cantinas, Conversations whispered in broken fragments, the memory of the governor's betrayal, the inevitability of Empire's wrath. Later, as twin moons rose silver over Sulet's dunes, ISB interrogators closed in on the remaining suspects. They used subtle devices, neural probes and calibrated toxins to extract confessions. A miner admitted to hiding blueprints. A schoolteacher acknowledged passing encrypted messages. Each confession, televised in grainy, hollow footage across the planet, reinforced the Bureau's reach. Dissent would meet swift obliteration. Yet, even amid the terror, sparks of defiance glimmered. A message scrawled in dried mud on a mining outpost read simply, "They will come for us all." A smuggler's informant, spared for her usefulness, discreetly passed a data chip containing coordinates of Imperial garrisons to a hooded courier. The ISB, triumphant in its display of power, remained blind to these buried embers. As the season waned and dusk bled into night, the Bureau departed Sulet as silently as it had arrived. The orange sky subsided into twin moons' glow, and life resumed under the watch of Imperial flags. Fear ruled the frontier more surely than any edict, for every gambler, laborer, and merchant now knew the price of disloyalty, an execution in broad daylight. In distant Coruscant corridors, analysts reviewed hollow feeds of Sulet's purge, nodding at the efficiency of the operation. The ISB's doctrine had proven its worth. A single display of force could hush thousands. But beyond the veneer of obedience, whispers persisted, seeds of rebellion ready to sprout in the darkness between worlds. A low mist drifted through Coruscant's lower levels as Inquisitors emerged from shuttles in a hidden docking bay below the Senate district. Their black cloaks rustled against the metal flooring. Nearby, Imperial Security Bureau agents assembled, data tablets in hand, scanning each shadowed corridor. Tonight's operation would extinguish rumors of a Jedi cell before they spread hope. Commander Vrek, the ISB's chief on Coruscant, reviewed intercepted chatter on his holopad. Reports pointed to secret gatherings beneath marble pillars in the abandoned Senate archives. If unchallenged, whispers of force sensitivity could spark insurrection. Vrek's jaw clenched. "Lord Vader joins us," he announced. Even the scarlet-cloaked Inquisitors stiffened at the Dark Lord's name. Above them, the Inquisitorious emblem glowed faintly, a crimson wheel overlaid with a black blade. Within the archives, vast halls of polished stone and carved friezes felt like a tomb for the Republic's past. The air was stale, punctuated by the hiss of stormtrooper armor shields. Carbine's red lights warned of swift action. Vrek led a cryptanalyst and an interrogator. "Scan for unauthorized transmissions," he ordered. The cryptanalyst's wrist pad projected spectral lines across the walls, clusters of signals too precise for casual communication. "Movement ahead," the interrogator whispered. They reached a vaulted chamber where centuries-old reliefs faded into a concealed hatch. An Inquisitor pressed a gauntlet to a rune-etched panel and released the latch. A narrow staircase beyond glowed by candles, the scent of damp stone and incense drifting upward. Blasters remained holstered but ready. Sabers hung at hips. At the base, a circular hall emerged. Inscribed glyphs of the outlawed Jedi Order lined the walls. 12 figures knelt before a black obsidian altar, young faces hidden beneath plain hoods. Their soft chanting echoed off the stone, an invocation to a vanished order. From above, Vader's heavy cloak swirled into view. His mechanical breathing filled the silence, and the disciples froze. 2 Inquisitors ignited double-bladed sabers, their crimson arcs slicing the gloom. Wreck raised a data torch, bathing the scene in pale blue light. Hollow screens flickered to life on each wall, displaying the captives' faces. Wreck's voice rang out. "Anyone resisting will be classified a traitor." One acolyte dared to rise. "We only seek—" His plea ended as an Inquisitor unleashed a force choke, silencing him. Panic broke the circle. Robes snagged on obsidian shards, candles toppled. Blaster fire cracked, sabers whirred. The chamber became a storm of red blades and rupturing shadows. ISB agents surged forward, securing survivors with magnetic restraints. Stormtroopers secured exits. Wreck's crypt analyst pocketed a carved Kyber idol for study. The interrogator recorded every incantation, storing encrypted logs on his wrist pad. Within minutes, order was restored. Vader's helmeted gaze swept the ruined hall. "Report," he rumbled. Wreck stepped forward, composed. 21 arrested. No fatalities. Network nodes identified in 4 sectors. Further raids scheduled at 0300 hours. Vader's chestplate thrummed softly. "Efficient," he murmured, the single word sealing the operation's success. Whispers of rebellion would fade before reaching stronger ears. Back in the docking bay, shuttles prepared to depart. Wreck offered a brief nod of satisfaction. The ISB's intelligence, combined with the Inquisitors' ruthless skill, had proven unstoppable. They formed an unholy alliance dedicated to rooting out dissent before it could ignite hope. Above, Coruscant's lights shimmered like distant stars. In the Bureau's hidden cells, the captured acolytes awaited interrogation, or worse. Across the Empire, word of the swift, merciless purge would spread fear. Compliance was mandatory, monitored by unseen eyes and enforced by relentless hands. In the Empire's depths, security thrived on secrecy. The ISB and the Inquisitorius, bound in pact, ensured that no spark of resistance ignited in the dark heart of the galaxy. Their hunt, relentless and impartial, would carry them to every world where hope dared flicker. A cold, grey light seeped through the high windows of the ISB tribunal chamber, illuminating flickering hollow dockets that floated like silent witnesses. Each bore the name and alleged crime of an Imperial agent under suspicion. The air was thick with tension as veteran officers and fresh recruits gathered for a trial none wished to attend. Commander Wreck stood on a raised dais, expression unreadable. Senior ISB officers formed a crescent around him, eyes fixed on the lone figure below, Agent Kira Lan. Once celebrated for her unerring intuition, she now appeared gaunt, betrayal etched into her features. 2 decades of service, uncovering corruption and rooting out dissent, had brought her to this moment, both judge and judged. A soft hum filled the chamber as the lead prosecutor activated Kira's dossier. Holographic text and images swirled into view. Intercepted comm records, face recognition stills, covert meetings captured by informants. Each entry implied Kira had protected sympathizers instead of exposing them. The accusations stung deeper than any blaster bolt. "You have been accused of facilitating the escape of suspected dissidents," the prosecutor intoned. "Provide your testimony." Kira inhaled, steeling herself. She scanned the officers, former comrades, now potential jurors, recalling late-night debriefs and shared victories. Could they truly condemn her? She raised her head and spoke, voice clear but soft. "I carried out orders until I saw the cost. We arrested entire workforces on rumors, loyal agents accused on flimsy evidence, lives destroyed. I believed in justice, not terror." A murmur rippled through the officers. Rex's gaze remained fixed. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. A noble sentiment. Yet you failed to report these lapses. You became the mole you now deny.
Kira's chest tightened. I reported what I could. When directives threatened innocent families, I chose mercy. I quietly protected those I trusted. Is that now a crime?
Silence stretched between testimony and judgment. The hollow dockets flickered, each file a potential comrade turned traitor. Kira braced for the next question. Name the officers you aided, Rex said, tone gentle yet final. Torn between loyalty to friends and duty to truth, she hesitated. Finally, she exhaled. Lieutenant Malax, Sergeant Athrain, and 3 others in Docking Bay N-17. They refused baseless accusations. Gasps echoed as 3 hollow profiles blinked into view. The officers exchanged glances, some pained, others cold. Aid to traitors, the highest crime the ISB prosecuted. The prosecutor advanced, hand sweeping toward a button on his belt. Your confession confirms complicity. Verdict will be rendered. Kira's heart pounded. Exile, imprisonment, or worse awaited. Yet she felt clarity. She had chosen conscience over obedience, even as the walls closed in. Commander Rek raised a hand. Sufficient. He let the word hang. We will deliberate. The hollow dockets dimmed. Officers melted away into shadowed corridors, leaving Kira alone under the stark dais. A distant rumble signaled heavy doors closing. Kira remained still, breathing shallowly. The chamber, once her proving ground, had become a crucible. She had laid bare her soul to judgment. Now she would learn the verdict. Footsteps approached. Rek returned, flanked by 2 officers. He studied Kira before speaking. Your actions endangered the Empire, but also saved lives. We cannot ignore either truth. Kira's pulse quickened. She braced for condemnation. Vrek continued, voice low. You will be reassigned. Stripped of field command, placed under oversight. Consider it a chance at redemption. Relief flickered in Kira's chest. Redemption. An opening, not absolution. She inclined her head, gratitude and resolve intertwined. As for those you named, Rek added, we will investigate. If their loyalty proves genuine, they may yet serve. The hollow dockets brightened once more, not as execution orders, but files for review. In the ISB, trust was fragile, fear pervasive. Loyalty was tested by fire, but mercy, rare as starlight, might endure. Escorted by silent guards, Kira stepped into the corridor. Coruscant's lights glimmered beyond the walls like distant promises. Her path remained uncertain, but her purpose was clear. Navigate the shadows, guided by. Kira's reassignment began not with rest, but with a descent. Deep beneath the polished levels of the ISB headquarters into sublevels few ever visited. The tribunal's judgment had spared her life, but it had condemned her to the cold underbelly of Imperial Intelligence, Section 13. She followed a silent technician past bulkhead after bulkhead, the lighting dimming with each corridor. The air grew sterile and cold, reeking faintly of burnt ozone and antiseptic. A final door slid open to reveal a stark chamber filled with humming machinery and a massive observation window. On the other side, a testing room, clinical and blindingly white. Inside, a subject was seated in a restraint chair, their arms and legs bound in padded clamps. Above their head, a lattice of neural links glowed with a soft violet pulse. The crown of the device splayed across the subject's skull like a mechanical spider. Wires fed into consoles manned by ISB scientists in dark lab coats. "Subject D17, said a voice beside Kira. Dr. Evrex, lead researcher in cognitive extraction, gestured toward the glass. "A former rebel courier. We're testing probe fidelity against memory obfuscation training." Kira kept her expression neutral, but her gut twisted. "And the point of all this? To pull truth directly," Evrex replied, his tone flat. "No lies, no omissions, no need for confession." On cue, the device activated. The neural clamps lit up, and the subject's back arched violently. A faint scream escaped through the soundproof glass. Holos flickered to life above the chair, shimmering fragments of the subject's memories rendered in chaotic bursts. A sun-drenched plateau, a woman smiling, the flash of a blaster bolt. Then, static, distortion, and darkness. The memory shattered like glass, reforming into another. A child's face blurred by terror, a makeshift bunker, a code word whispered under breath. Kira turned away. "How many of these subjects break?" "Most," Evrex replied without pause. "But their minds hold critical paths. Courier routes, rebel cells, encryption schemes. Fragments matter." In the next room, the subject writhed as another surge from the MindLink probe passed through their cortex. The holos now flashed images overlaid with ISB data, names, locations, dates, algorithms, attempting to reconstruct full narratives. The machine didn't simply retrieve thoughts. It tried to impose order on them, to shape them into use. But it wasn't precise. "Fractures are a side effect," Evrex explained. "Too much probing, and memory dissolves. It's like pulling threads from a worn cloth." "Does anyone survive intact?" Kira asked. A moment passed before he answered. "No one's the same afterward." Kira watched the subject slump forward. The lights on the clamps dimmed to a slow pulse. A med team entered, unstrapped the limp figure, and wheeled them out, eyes blank and limbs unresponsive. In their place, a new subject was led in. This one still defiant, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the mirrored glass. Kira could almost feel the hatred radiating off them. "They'll break too," Evrex muttered. "Eventually." Kira turned to him. "You call this intelligence work? I see a weapon with no control." Evrex narrowed his eyes. "Control is the point, Agent Lan. Total, unfiltered control over thought. We're past extracting secrets. We're shaping minds." The thought lingered long after she left the lab. The corridor outside felt colder than before, the lights dimmer. She remembered standing in courtrooms, gathering confessions through dialogue and evidence. Now, the Empire harvested minds with electric fingers and dissected memories like corpses. Back in her quarters, Kira sat in silence. The holoscreen blinked softly with new files awaiting her analysis. Transcripts from probe extractions, decrypted visuals, psychological breakdowns. She didn't open them. Her thoughts drifted to the tribunal, to Vrek's voice. A chance at redemption. But redemption was meaningless if the soul was scorched away. Outside her window, Coruscant's skyline pulsed with synthetic life. Somewhere above, the Senate still convened, speaking of order and prosperity. But below, in the Empire's quiet chambers of shadow, a different kind of truth was being forged. One harvested by force, not earned. And Kira knew this was only the beginning. The broadcasts began in the outer rim. At first, they appeared without fanfare. Interruptions on local feeds, sudden hijacks of starport information kiosks. But soon, the pattern revealed itself. Every transmission was the same format. A trembling figure seated beneath the ISB insignia, flanked by officers in stark uniforms, a harsh light illuminating every twitch of guilt on their face. Kira stood in a crowded concourse on Coruscant when she saw her first one in person. The starport's routine murmur died instantly as the main holographic display fizzled and reformed into the image of a gaunt man, sweating, shaking, and reciting words clearly not his own. "My name is Sel Tren. I betrayed the Empire by conspiring with insurgents on Hark's Prime. I acted against the will of our great Emperor. My punishment is just. I beg forgiveness." The screen cut to a still of the same man, lifeless, eyes glassy. Below him, in bold crimson, "Justice served." The crowd did not cheer. They did not move. Silence wrapped the starport like a vacuum. These were not trials. These were spectacles. ISB labeled the campaign Operation Lens Flare, a psychological initiative to suppress sedition before it could fester. The public was no longer simply policed. They were spectators to fear, daily reminders of the cost of disloyalty. The Empire wanted obedience not only through law, but through dread. Back at headquarters, Kira reviewed the technical briefs. Each broadcast was carefully staged, confessions pre-written, lighting optimized to enhance desperation, voices edited to preserve a raw edge of emotion. Even the ambient silence between words was designed by ISB PsyOps specialists to heighten unease. One file caught her attention. Subject K-17, a mid-level administrator from a border planet, had attempted suicide 3 times before the broadcast was completed. The confession had to be stitched together from hours of footage, his voice stabilized by vocal synthesis. It was, Evrex noted coldly, effective in the outer colonies, particularly among agricultural populations. Kira slammed the datapad shut. She had once believed in order, structure forged from clarity and discipline. But this wasn't order. This was terror, made into theater. Control not through loyalty, but through the promise of annihilation. Later that week, she was summoned to a briefing in the Echo Chamber, a vast oval room lined with hollow displays and observation tiers. Rek stood at the center, his voice booming through the space. "Fear," he said, "is the most honest language in the galaxy. All beings understand it. And right now, the Empire speaks fluently." The screens around him lit up, snapshots from a dozen worlds. Crowds frozen in front of glowing hollows. Children clinging to parents. Shopkeepers with hands clasped behind backs. Dock workers staring with hollow eyes. "These broadcasts are not just deterrents," Rek continued. "They are conversion tools. A fearful citizen is one step from becoming a loyal informant." A murmur of approval rippled through the officers. Kira said nothing. After the briefing, she passed by a monitoring station. A technician gestured her over. "Watch this, fresh from Sinagar." He cued a feed. A woman appeared on screen, elegant even in captivity. Her voice cracked as she confessed to leaking flight paths to rebel agents. "I did it for love," she whispered. Kira recognized her, an old friend, one who had helped Kira in her early years navigating bureaucratic politics. They had shared drinks, secrets, hopes. Now she was just another tool in the Empire's campaign. The screen cut to black. A familiar message flashed. Justice served. Kira turned away, her jaw clenched. She thought of the probes, the tribunals, the hollowed minds. And now this. Fear broadcast like starlight, reaching every corner of the galaxy. The Empire no longer sought to hide its power. It flaunted it, weaponized it. And the people, frightened, frozen, silent, watched and learned. There was no need for chains if fear held tighter. The first signs were subtle. An operations unit on Daylon 5 arrived 2 hours early to an ambush point, only to find the rebels already gone. On Corva 9, an ISB extraction team moved in on what they believed was a safe house, only to walk into a decoy packed with ion mines. In both cases, the mission logs were clean, too clean. Kira read the reports in silence, her eyes narrowing at the timestamps. There was no question. Someone was inside their system. What unsettled her more was the precision. Whoever had done it hadn't crashed the network, hadn't brought down communications. They had edited, carefully, invisibly, and with just enough manipulation to sabotage, not expose. Then came the incident on Ord Talex. A routine purge operation spiraled into chaos. Halfway through deployment, command terminals across the region blinked red. Orders changed in real time. Units were rerouted. Conflicting commands began to overwrite each other. Attack, hold, withdraw, attack again. On the ground, agents scrambled, their squad leaders shouting over comms that no one could verify which orders were real. And then, just as abruptly, the broadcasts stopped. By the time the smoke cleared, the rebel cell was gone. No casualties, no trace. All surveillance had been looped, all sensor logs erased. But the most damning sign, the final message left on every ISB datapad in that sector. You watch the galaxy, who's watching you? It was signed simply, Spectre. Within minutes, internal lockdown protocols triggered across 5 sectors. Kira stood at the central command hub, watching as officers scrambled like ants under a collapsing hive. Emergency patches were deployed, old access keys purged, neural encryptions reinitialized. "This is impossible," muttered one systems analyst. "The data trail is gone. Not just masked, gone." Kira said nothing. She had a theory, a dangerous one. Spectre wasn't some anonymous slicer hiding in a forgotten moonbase. The infiltration was too precise, the timing too flawless. This was someone who knew how the ISB thought, someone who understood not just the code, but the culture. Later that evening, she reviewed the access breach from her private terminal. One of the pathways led to a long-retired clearance channel used for cross-sector logistics. Abandoned years ago, never properly decommissioned. It had been reactivated for exactly 19 minutes. That level of detail required more than raw skill. It required intent. She summoned the footage from the external surveillance drone above the Ord Talex station, hoping for a trace visual. What she found made her freeze. A single figure in a long coat, moving through the outskirts of the compound during the blackout. No markings, no weapon visible. Just a datapad in one hand, and in the other, a signal beacon pulsing in sync with the station's relay tower. The smuggler. That was the only explanation. Someone with the means to travel, to barter access codes, to navigate without triggering internal threat sensors. Someone the Empire would overlook, until it was too late. The report she filed was vague. Likely outside infiltration. Recommend increased clearance protocols and an internal sweep of legacy systems. But inside, Kira felt the tremor of something larger. The rebels had gotten lucky before. Here, though, was intent, planning, coordination, and worse, the leak had come from within. She stood before the central holomap as night fell, watching as sectors slowly regained order. But she knew what Vrek would say. One glitch doesn't break a machine. Yet machines don't bleed. Systems don't panic.
And on that day, the ISB had panicked.
For the first time, they had been played. Somewhere out there, Spectre was still watching, and the armor of fear the Empire had forged so carefully now bore its first visible crack. Kira hadn't been sleeping. She told herself it was the backlog of reports, the system audits, the residual mess left in Spectre's wake. But when the lights dimmed and silence fell in the ISB command wing, it wasn't the echo of alarms that haunted her. It was the quiet questions. They'd started small. A pause in judgment, a glance at a suspect's file longer than necessary, a hesitancy before authorizing a purge order. But each moment chipped away at the edges of certainty she had clung to since her first day in uniform. And then came the disappearance of Agent Hallen. He was a fixture in ISB Section C, a by-the-book veteran, precise, meticulous, unwavering. But 2 weeks ago, he didn't report to duty. No notice, no message. His transponder chip, surgically embedded like all of theirs, went dead 5 hours after his last logged datapad activity. The official story was security reassignment. Internally, everyone knew that meant one of two things: reconditioning or elimination. But Kira wasn't convinced. She reviewed his final access logs. They were unusual, deep dives into interrogation archives, with flagged entries on minors and civilians. There were query strings that suggested not an analyst's eye, but a seeker's. Someone digging for something they weren't supposed to see. And then she found it. A personal file hidden inside a dummy training sim, unencrypted, almost like he wanted it found. A voice recording. "If anyone hears this, I can't do it anymore. They say we bring order, but I only see fear. I see silence where questions used to be. I see ghosts in every corridor. We don't stop chaos. We become it. I'm leaving, not defecting, just stepping away, if that's even allowed." Kira stared at the screen long after the recording ended. Later that night, she stood alone on the balcony of the Eastern Observatory, rain tracing lines down the cold, transparisteel. Coruscant's towers glowed in shifting hues beneath the storm, but she barely saw them. She thought of Hallen, of the way his boots always squeaked slightly on the floor, of his quiet jokes in the data archives, of how he never interrupted even during the worst tribunal sessions. He hadn't disappeared. He had escaped. And in doing so, he'd left behind the one thing the ISB couldn't process, categorize, or suppress: doubt. Kira wiped rain from her eyes, uncertain if it was from the storm or something else. Her grip tightened on the edge of the rail. Around her, the city hummed with indifference. Below her, thousands of lives marched through routine surveillance, dutiful, afraid, silent. Every agent told themselves their role was noble, necessary, that their hands kept the Empire from falling apart. But lately, Kira had begun to wonder, what if the Empire wanted it to fall apart? Not in the dramatic, explosive way of a crumbling system, but in the quiet erosion of truth and trust. What if control wasn't about preventing rebellion, but ensuring it? A soft chime pulled her from the storm. A message pinged her personal console. Subject: Hallen, unauthorized log-on attempt detected. She opened the alert. The trace led to a neutral comm node outside of ISB jurisdiction. No precise location, just a ping from somewhere in the outer rim. He was alive. Kira closed the message without flagging it. She hesitated for only a moment, then disabled the tracking subroutine embedded in the alert. Quietly, deliberately. Some secrets, she realized, weren't meant for reports. Behind her, the lights of the ISB tower cast long shadows. Ahead of her, a storm continued to rage over a city that forgot how to feel. But beneath it all, the ground was shifting, and she was no longer sure which side she stood on. While the Empire's secret police tightened their grip, whispers of defiance grew. Underground networks coalesced into something more than rumor, a spark that would kindle a galaxy-wide revolt. Long before battle fleets and coordinated strikes, the rebellion began in whispers. The senator called it emergency housing, though the Empire would have labeled it sedition. Nestled in the shadowed cliffs of Femis IV, a rain-lashed world forgotten by most nav charts, lay a network of caves once used by prospectors during the Clone Wars. Now they echoed with low murmurs, data pads crackling with hidden messages, and the quiet resolve of those who no longer believed in the Empire's promise. Senator Vansa Tyrell had once stood proudly in the Senate rotunda, her voice unwavering as she pleaded for reforms. But after the dissolution of the Senate and the rise of regional governors, her protests became liabilities. Stripped of her platform and influence, she vanished from public record, rumored dead or imprisoned. In truth, she had returned home to a storm-ravaged world and a legacy of stubborn defiance. She hadn't planned to build a resistance cell. At first, it was just one fugitive, a former university professor accused of ideological contamination. Then came a starport controller who had refused to falsify logs for an ISB shipment. And then, a former clone trooper, deserted and hunted, seeking redemption in something greater than orders. By the end of the third month, the caves held 27 fugitives. They slept on ration mats, stored water in scavenged med canisters, and used melted storm panels to patch the dripping ceilings. Communications were kept analog. No networks, no traces. Messages were passed by hand, encrypted in ancient trade languages few still read. It was slow. It was fragile. It was real. Tyrell moved among them with quiet purpose. Her once senatorial robes now replaced by a patched field cloak. She read news feeds by lantern light and mapped the ripple effects of the Empire's tightening grip. She taught the fugitives how to speak with purpose, how to hide their thoughts even under scan, and how to read the political currents like weather systems. But it wasn't just survival she taught. It was hope, a radical, dangerous kind of hope. One evening, a soft wind carried the scent of scorched durasteel from a nearby settlement. A mining facility had been bombed. Word soon reached them. The ISB suspected rebel sabotage. 17 workers had been detained, 5 executed publicly. Tyrell gathered the cave's inhabitants. Flickering lanterns cast long shadows on the jagged walls, their light catching the worn faces and tired eyes of those who had already given up so much. "Let this not scare you," she said, her voice calm but heavy. "Let it clarify what we are, what they are." A young woman, barely 20, once a dockhand on Corellia, spoke up. "Then what do we do, Senator? If we're not just hiding, what are we?" Tyrell's gaze met hers. "We're the Embers. The Empire is the storm, but even storms pass. And if we burn steady enough, others will see us. Others will come." And they did. Messages from other worlds began to arrive. Fragments of transmission from Ferrix, a burst signal from Moncala, even whispers from within the core. None of it coordinated, none of it planned, but the patterns were forming.
These weren't isolated acts of desperation. They were the beginnings of a movement.
From her datapad, Tyrell began sketching something larger than caves and cloaks. A network, a plan, a future where the Empire's reach no longer strangled the stars. While the Empire's secret police tightened their grip, whispers of defiance grew. Underground networks like Tyrell's coalesced into something more than rumor, a spark that would kindle a galaxy-wide revolt. The rebellion was not born with drums or banners. It was born in silence, in loyalty, in the unwavering refusal to be broken. And now, with systems across the outer rim beginning to listen, those scattered fires would need to become a flame. The ember had caught, and now the flame demanded secrecy. As rebel cells began to connect across sectors, anonymity became survival. They dropped their birth names and donned call signs, aliases stitched from lost homeworlds, dead siblings, or old starfighter codes. In this growing network of dissent, identities were burdens, not banners. In the damp alleys of Moltok Station, a courier known only as Frostline moved through the evening market. Her cloak was frayed, indistinct. Her boots scuffed just enough to blend with the dock workers and drifters. No one looked twice, which was the point. She had memorized the route. Slip past the customs node by the broken droid vendor, cross to Dock B through the service conduit, and enter Hangar 9 precisely 4 minutes before shift change. There, a contact waited, someone calling himself Ashfield, to receive the holopuck strapped under her tunic. It contained schematics for a new sensor array, capable of piercing Imperial jamming fields. If it worked, rebel cells could coordinate faster than the Empire could intercept. Frostline passed a trio of stormtroopers lounging beside a supply crate. Her heart thudded once, hard, sharp, but she didn't break stride. Behind her goggles, her eyes flicked to the nearest reflection. They hadn't turned. Good. In the early days, encryption had been crude, repurposed smuggling codes, back-alley slicer patches. But as the Empire's surveillance tightened, the rebels adapted. One sector's message could take a dozen jumps through embedded channels, bouncing between satellites, piggybacking on civilian broadcasts. The ISB listened, yes, but they rarely understood. Inside Hangar 9, Ashfield waited, leaning against a crate marked Tibana canisters, fragile. He was taller than she expected, his cloak cleaner, his posture too perfect. But he gave the signal. Right hand brushing the chin, 2 fingers across the chest. Frostline responded, mirroring the gesture in reverse. Only then did she approach. He didn't speak, just extended a gloved hand. She pressed the holopuck into his palm, small, no larger than a ration biscuit, but encoded with information worth the lives of thousands. The puck blinked once, then dimmed. Delivery confirmed. Neither said a word. Words could be traced. She turned to go. Behind her, Ashfield vanished into the blur of loading crews and flickering flight manifests. Within moments, there was no sign they had ever met. Elsewhere across the mid-rim, similar exchanges unfolded daily. In crumbling temples on Jeddah, aboard rusting freighters above Ord Mantell, even within the very walls of Coruscant's lower districts. Each courier, each puck, each coded phrase threads weaving a web of silent defiance. Back at her safe house, Frostline removed her cloak and placed it over a steaming pipe to dry. The room was Spartan: one bed, one sink, a cracked mirror. But the small terminal in the corner was a marvel. It could decrypt rebel packets encoded with a new cipher, one developed by defected Imperial technicians. The program's name was Whisperfall. Only 8 operatives across the rebellion had it. Frostline keyed in a new phrase and waited. The message blinked across the screen. Red Star confirmed. Cargo delivered. New route inbound. Stay shadowed. She allowed herself a breath. Each successful handoff was a victory. Not as flashy as an ambush or a stolen freighter, but just as vital. Without information, the rebellion would fracture. Without misdirection, the Empire would crush them before they could unite. Encryption was more than math and signals. It was trust, layered in code, buried in silence, sharpened by risk. As the Empire chased phantoms and shadow names, real plans grew behind the veil. Starship designs, propaganda vectors, officer defection routes. In a galaxy drowned in surveillance, the rebels had become ghosts. And ghosts knew how to whisper. And while no Holonet report ever mentioned Frostline or Ashfield, their names lived on encrypted tongues, passed from cell to cell. The flame was growing, but it would burn quiet. For now, encrypted names had linked them, scattered across systems. But networks and ciphers could only do so much. Eventually, rebellion needed a home. The moon of Yavin 4 offered little at first glance. Lush jungles, crumbling temples and dense mists that coiled through ancient catacombs. But hidden beneath its vines and shadowed stone was a labyrinth the Empire had overlooked. A former research outpost, long abandoned during the Clone Wars, still hummed faintly with backup power. To the rebels, it was perfect. The cell that landed first came from Yundland sector, veterans of freighter raids and supply line sabotage. They called themselves Torchbearers, and they'd come with a mission: clear the site, disable any lingering security, and hold until reinforcements could arrive. If successful, Yavin 4 would become the first central base of rebel operations. But the Empire, always watchful, had dispatched a scout patrol to the outer moons, suspecting smuggler activity. 3 TIE scouts, each accompanied by a small detachment of troopers, were already entering Yavin's atmosphere before the rebels had finished rigging perimeter sensors. The clash came fast. It began in mist, blasters flashing like lightning across fog-thick corridors, echoes ricocheting between vine-covered pylons and half-buried towers. Rebel spotters in the canopy used signal mirrors and coded chirps to relay positions. Below, fighters maneuvered through stone passages older than the Republic itself. Commander Tyron Voss led the defense. A former Republic tactician turned dissident, Voss had chosen the tunnels purposefully. "Let their numbers work against them," he'd said. "Let the jungle blind them." And it did. Imperial forces fanned out too quickly, their formation dissolving as thick vines and sensor disruptions scattered their readings. One by one, the patrols found themselves ambushed by rebels who knew every echo, every footfall pattern on ancient floors. The jungle favored the quiet and the clever. In the largest chamber, a hollowed dome lined with faded murals, an Imperial lieutenant barked for a retreat just as the roof gave way. Rebel commandos, descending on cables from above, cut through the troopers in seconds. When the last TIE scout tried to escape, a well-timed ion blast from the treetop perch of a sharpshooter named Vevra brought it down. It exploded against a ridge, sending smoke curling above the canopy, briefly visible from orbit, then swallowed by the clouds. for the first time, the Empire had lost ground. Rebel cheers echoed through the tunnels, not in drunken jubilation, but with fierce restraint, the kind that knew more would come. Still, this mattered. Yavin 4 was no longer a hiding place. It was a stronghold. By nightfall, the catacombs had been secured, generators reactivated, and lookout posts established among the canopy. The once abandoned base now pulsed with encoded transmissions, repurposed consoles, and the low, urgent hum of strategy. In a quiet corridor overlooking a jungle ridge, Commander Voss activated a secure channel. "Strike confirmed," he said, voice steady. "Minimal losses. Yavin is ours." The voice that answered, filtered, distant, but unmistakably that of Mon Mothma, was cool and resolute. "Then the spark has found shelter. Hold it, Commander. The others will come." And they did. Within days, cells from Reloth, Chandrila, and Sullust began sending envoys. Supply ships landed under cover of night. Medics, engineers, and tacticians stepped into the carved halls of the Yavin temples, each one carrying whispers of uprisings elsewhere. Sparks. Everywhere. But here, they now had kindling. Even in the darkness, amid the ruins of a forgotten age, the feeling grew, like heat just beneath the skin. Not yet ablaze, not yet, but it was coming. From catacombs and code names, the rebellion had taken its first ground. And while Yavin 4 remained shrouded in mist, its signal pulsed outward, a heartbeat to the scattered and the silenced. A new phase had begun. The war would not be won in whispers alone. The battle on Yavin was more than a tactical victory. It was a signal, sent through smoke and silence. But to kindle rebellion across the stars, victory alone was not enough. The galaxy needed voices. With their foothold on Yavin 4 secured, the Alliance turned next to the task of connection, not through encrypted whispers or secret couriers, but through something bolder. Sound waves, signals, hope made audible. Rebel tacticians called it Operation Echo Flame, but to those scattered and waiting, it became known simply as the Voice. It began as a single makeshift hollow station, hidden in the rings of an uninhabited moon near the Horus system. There, deep in the magnetic distortions that rendered scanners unreliable, an outcast engineer named Sero Dalek reprogrammed a salvaged Imperial comm dish to broadcast wideband transmissions on multiple civilian frequencies. The first message lasted only 30 seconds. "This is not surrender," the voice had said, calm, steady, laced with conviction. "This is not defeat. This is the beginning." The hollow station had no call sign, no coordinates. But across outer systems, mining rigs, freighter hulls, refugee camps, receivers crackled to life, and people listened. The next night, the broadcast returned, longer this time, a voice wrapped in stars and static, speaking of freedom, unity, and the power of choice. Stories of lost families, disappeared senators, and most importantly, tales of resistance. Soon, other holostations joined in. A rotating array of pirate broadcasts sprang up across the mid and outer rims, from asteroid belts to forgotten gas outposts. Some were mobile, converted shuttles cloaked by old separatist stealth tech. Others were permanent, buried in canyons or tucked behind shielded moons. They used mismatched parts, scavenged panels, and code phrases changed daily, and they all broadcasted under the same banner, the Voice in Exile. On Chandrila, an old woman wept as she heard her native folk songs, banned by the Empire, woven between encoded rebel dispatches. On Eriadu, a group of factory workers gathered around a makeshift receiver, silent, as the voice spoke of strikes and sabotage that had brought down an Imperial supply chain. Even on Corellia, beneath layers of surveillance, a smuggler rerouted part of his navigation console to pick up the signal, nodding along with a grin. Each message came with just enough detail to be real, but not enough to endanger the speakers. No names, no ranks, just ideas, stitched together with sincerity. But the voice behind the largest holostation, known by many simply as the speaker, became a quiet legend. Deep and resonant, their tone carried both empathy and fire. Whether it was one person or many, no one could say for sure. But their cadence never wavered. Their words moved people. "We are the stars they tried to snuff out," the speaker once said. "We are the memory they tried to erase. We are what comes after fear." Of course, the ISB noticed. Interference squads were deployed to jam signals, triangulate sources, and crush the voices. Sometimes they succeeded. A station in the Andos cluster was destroyed mid-broadcast. Another near Denon was silenced before its third message. But new ones always returned, sometimes within days. The speaker's voice remained, shifting frequencies, hopping relays, refusing to die. And the messages grew bolder. Instructions for disrupting convoys, codes for safe houses, clipped, hurried updates from rebel skirmishes. The transmissions carried not just stories now, but strategy. On Yavin, Rebel Command listened closely. Commander Tyron Voss, seated before a blinking receiver, allowed a rare smile as the speaker's voice cut through the static once more. "To those listening in shadows," the voice said, "know this: you are not alone. 1,000 sparks burn beyond your reach, and each one waits for your flame." The jungle around Yavin stayed quiet. But in 1,000 corners of the galaxy, people sat a little straighter. Voices in exile had found their way into hearts, and those hearts, once stirred, would be harder for the Empire to silence. The next move would not be just words. It would be war. The voices had traveled far. Across the void, they had kindled belief, whispered strategy, and rekindled the will to fight. But belief alone was not a rebellion, and strategy without unity was chaos waiting to collapse. The speaker's final transmission before silence posed a question. What if we stood together? In the weeks that followed, encrypted pings rippled across the holonet like tremors beneath durasteel. Invitations cloaked in poetry. Coordinates buried in old trade manifests. A summons not from one leader, but from an idea that those resisting in isolation might finally meet. They gathered aboard the Starfire Horizon, a heavily modified diplomatic cruiser long thought lost in the Clone Wars, now drifting in hyperspace on a roving trajectory calculated to avoid Imperial triangulation. Its hull bore scorch marks and patches from half a dozen systems. But inside, its core held something more vital than weaponry: hope. The conference chamber had once hosted Republic negotiations. Now it held smugglers in weathered jackets, senators in exile, deserters, spies, scholars, and Jedi survivors cloaked in the Force. It was a council of contradictions, many of whom had once opposed each other. But the galaxy had changed, and with it, so had they. Overhead, a massive holomap projected the known territories, Imperial zones pulsing in red, free systems flickering in blue,
contested space shifting like uncertain tides. Around it, species from every reach of the stars formed a ring of uneasy allies. Mon Mothma, dignified even in her worn robes, stepped forward first. "We can no longer afford to be fragments," she said. "The Empire does not fear scattered voices. It fears a chorus." Her words echoed through the chamber's domed ceiling, lingering in the breaths that followed. Some nodded. Others remained wary. Trust had not yet taken root. But the urgency in the room was undeniable. From the far side of the chamber, General Jan Dodonna activated a star chart, displaying data relayed from Yavin and beyond. "We have resources, but no structure. Courage, but no chain of command. That must change." Smuggler Captain Dree von Ars scoffed, arms crossed. "You want smugglers like me to follow orders from senators who used to vote with Palpatine?" Senator Bail Organa didn't flinch. "I want smugglers, senators, and Jedi to recognize that our enemy doesn't discriminate when it crushes worlds. Nor should we when defending them." Silence again. Tense. Waited. Until a Jedi, cloaked, face shadowed, stepped forward and gently laid a lightsaber hilt on the central table. "I have not drawn this in years," they said quietly. "But if the Force has guided us here, it is not to stand apart. It is to protect what still remains." One by one, hands moved forward. Claws, gloved fingers, trembling digits, rough palms, resting near the hilt, on the map, or on one another. Not as a ritual, not yet as an alliance, but as the first motion towards something greater. "Then we move forward together," Mothma said. Declarations followed, not of allegiance, but of commitment. Each group pledged support on their own terms: safe routes, stolen data, Jedi healing, funds, firepower, and fleets. They argued over symbols, debated structures, even what to call themselves. But when they left that ship, one truth bound them. They would no longer fight alone. Outside the viewport, hyperspace shimmered, a cascade of light, fluid and infinite. Inside, the once scattered now formed constellations of resolve. A symbol was soon chosen, a phoenix rising, an echo of old myths, reborn in fire and defiance. Thus the alliance was born, not as a government, not yet, but as a rebellion united, diverse, fractured in memory, but whole in purpose. The starfire horizon slipped away into the stars, a phantom cruiser bearing the hopes of 1,000 worlds. And far behind them, the Empire, still unaware of the summit, continued to fracture planets with impunity. But for the first time, the rebellion had a name, a direction, a fleet. The chorus had found harmony. The alliance had grown. Its pulse beat stronger, faster with every passing day. A rebellion no longer in its infancy, but one that moved with purpose, with intent. But intent alone was not enough. The Empire controlled the stars, the hyperlanes, the supply routes. It had a map to the galaxy, and the rebellion had none. That was about to change. On the far side of the galaxy, in an Imperial vault hidden beneath a surface of harsh, uninhabitable rock, lay the first star map. It was a relic of unimaginable value, an archive of hyperlane routes, secure transit paths, and the very network of Imperial navigation used to enforce the Empire's dominance. The map was not merely a collection of coordinates. It was the key to the entire galaxy, unlocking shortcuts, secret trade routes,
and the smuggling lanes that had been all but erased from civilian knowledge. Whoever held it controlled the movement of the galaxy. The rebellion's leadership knew that they could not take on the Empire's war machine without knowing how to navigate its own web. So, a plan was forged. Under the cover of darkness, the operation was set in motion. The squad that had volunteered for the mission was a mix of former Imperials, veteran smugglers, and a handful of Alliance agents who had once been trained in the art of infiltration. Their objective: breach the vault and capture the maps. With the map, they could disappear when necessary, outmaneuver Imperial patrols, and maintain the element of surprise. Essential advantages for a movement that lacked the military might to go toe-to-toe with the Empire's might. But as their transport ship slipped past the sensor net, they knew the stakes. The Empire had eyes everywhere, and this vault, buried deep on a mining colony moon, was heavily guarded. The risk of detection was high. If the Empire caught wind of what was happening, the consequences would be catastrophic. The mission's leader, Coruscant, a grizzled former Imperial officer, surveyed the plan. "No mistakes," he said quietly, as the ground team prepped their gear. "We can't afford to be caught." With blasters secured, stealth suits activated, and comms checked, they made their way into the vault. It was a labyrinth of steel corridors and automated security drones. The alarms had been shut down, at least temporarily, but every footstep echoed as if amplified in the vault's hollowed-out halls. At the heart of the vault, a series of holographic displays stood surrounded by guards, each of them unaware of the rebellion's encroachment. The star map was there, projected in the center, glowing, brilliant, and alive. The map wasn't merely a document, but a constantly shifting, constantly updating series of coordinates, a living representation of the Empire's control of the galaxy. The moment they breached the room, all hell broke loose. A series of miscalculated steps set off a silent alarm. In a split second, the room was flooded with stormtroopers, their white armor stark against the dim lights of the vault. The intruders had anticipated resistance, but not this. Not the sheer volume of Imperial firepower converging on their position. Coruscant drew his blaster with precision, aiming for the console as the team scattered, returning fire. But the blaster bolts danced off the reinforced walls, the stormtroopers closing in from all sides. Time was running out. Maya, a smuggler with an eye for quick escapes, grabbed the map's data crystal, swiftly sliding it into a concealed compartment of her pack. "Got it!" she yelled. "Now let's move!" It was a rush to the exit. Alarm klaxons blared, and their footsteps pounded against the floor like a drumbeat announcing their demise. But they were quicker. They had a head start. Running through the corridor's twisting maze, they met resistance again. More stormtroopers, more fire. But their way was clear, and the map was in hand. With a final sprint, they reached the outer airlock, the cold vacuum of space staring back at them. The transport ship, with its engines primed and waiting, was now their only hope of escape. Maya sealed the airlock, and the ship's engines roared to life, pulling them away from the vault and into the darkness. The shockwave of an explosion from the base's internal security systems echoed in the distance. Imperial forces had detonated their last defenses. The squad breathed heavily, adrenaline still coursing through their veins, but their mission was complete. The first star map was in their hands. Now, they had the key to the galaxy. A universe that once seemed closed off to them now lay wide open, filled with routes and corridors through which they could move unchallenged. As the ship broke through the atmosphere, they looked out over the moon's surface below, the dark expanse stretching ahead of them. Their next steps would change everything. With the map, the smuggling routes, the hidden lanes, all now under their control, the rebellion had just gained the edge it needed.
The Empire would be searching for the thieves for years. But by then, the galaxy would already have shifted.
And the fight for freedom was about to take on a whole new dimension. The first star map had been secured, but the victory was only the beginning. The rebellion had scattered cells, fractured leaders, and pockets of resistance. But they lacked a central, unified command, a place to gather, plan, and strike back at the Empire with purpose. They needed a stronghold, a place that would allow them to regroup, organize, and coordinate their next moves. That place came to be known as Polaris. It was not a traditional capital. There were no grand halls or shining spires. But in the void between the stars, the rebels would create something far more valuable. A hidden fortress, far from the prying eyes of the Empire. It was a place that could not be found by any conventional means, a place where the fires of rebellion could burn undisturbed. The project was codenamed Operation Polaris, and it was to be carried out in secret. A fleet of modified freighters, transport ships, and mining drones arrived at an uncharted asteroid belt on the edge of known space. The target was a colossal asteroid, one that had once been a mining operation. Now, it was the perfect place for the rebellion to carve out a new home. The process of turning a cold, desolate rock into a thriving headquarters began with the hum of heavy machinery. Drilling beams bored into the asteroid's surface, and automated systems began to cut away the rock, carving vast chambers and hidden corridors. It was a slow process, but there was no hurry. The Empire had no idea they were here. Yet, inside the asteroid's core, the rebels built their fortress, a hidden labyrinth of tunnels, communications hubs, and secured storage bays. Each new passageway, each new tunnel carved into the rock, was one more layer of protection. The structure's design was meant to be as decentralized as possible, reducing the risk of a single strike taking down their entire operation. Everything was spread out, with hidden sections that would allow for quick evacuations if necessary. Each room, each corridor, was carefully planned for maximum efficiency, while keeping the hidden base as secure as possible. But the heart of Polaris was its comm stations. These were the lifeblood of the rebellion's communication network, and the reason the fortress was built in the first place. From here, the leaders of the various cells across the galaxy could coordinate their efforts, receive vital intelligence, and relay orders. The security measures on these stations were extraordinary. Jam-proof frequencies, encrypted transmissions, and layered firewalls to keep the Empire from listening in. Within weeks, a rudimentary but effective command center began to take shape. The comm stations were now operational, the central control center humming with life. Rebel ships passed through its corridors, docking at secure bays that had been outfitted with the latest stealth technology. The Empire's sensors would be useless here. Polaris was effectively a ghost in the void. It was a triumph, a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the rebellion. Yet, there were no grand celebrations. Not yet. The leaders knew that the Empire would eventually realize what had happened, that this hidden outpost was not just another rebel hideaway, but a beacon of resistance. The question wasn't if the Empire would come for Polaris, but when. Inside the control center, a group of high-ranking officers sat at a table, studying the data feeds from the star map. Plans were already being laid out for the next phase of the rebellion's operations. They would need to act quickly. Polaris was safe for now, but it would not remain a secret forever. The rebellion had a chance to strike back at the heart of the Empire,
to move their forces in ways they hadn't been able to before. "I think we can make this work," said Captain Ryan, a former Imperial intelligence officer turned rebel leader, staring at the holographic projection of the galaxy before him. "We have the map, we have the fortress, but we need more people, more ships, more support." "We'll get it," said Leah, a smuggler who had long supported the rebellion. She leaned over the table, tapping a series of coordinates into a datapad. "We'll spread the word, send out the call. Polaris will be the signal. The rebellion is growing." As the base continued to develop, more and more cells began to take notice. Rebel leaders from across the galaxy, those who had been operating in secret, alone, in small, isolated groups, began to send their ships to Polaris. It became the heart of a growing resistance, the place where they could share their successes and failures, learn from one another, and take collective action. But even as Polaris became a beacon for the galaxy's discontent, the Empire's long reach was ever present. The moment they discovered the location of this hidden outpost, the Empire would send its full might to destroy it. Polaris was safe, but not invulnerable. The rebels had built something formidable, but they also knew they had built a target. The war was about to change. No longer would the rebellion be a scattering of cells hiding in the dark corners of the galaxy. They had a capital now, a place to unite, to plan, and to strike. And soon, the Empire would know exactly what they had created. Polaris was no longer just a symbol of resistance. It was the beginning of a new hope. The fires of rebellion had burned bright across the galaxy, but even the brightest flames could be snuffed out by the Empire's iron grip. The formation of Polaris had been a triumph, a new beacon for the scattered cells of resistance. Yet, as the rebellion grew stronger, so too did the Empire's efforts to quash it. And it was at Scarif, on a remote tropical moon, that the stakes would become unbearable. Scarif had once been a peaceful world, its emerald seas and vast beaches now a distant memory. Now, it was the location of an Imperial data archive, one that contained a secret the rebellion desperately needed. Inside the vaults of the Scarif facility lay the plans for a weapon so powerful, so devastating, that it could end the rebellion before it truly had a chance to grow. The Death Star. The mission was simple in its objective: secure the plans and get them back to the rebellion. But the Empire would not allow this breach of its secrets. The rebels had no illusions about the cost. Their chances of success were slim, and the price would be high. As the rebel fleet moved into position above Scarif, they knew the Empire would have every possible defense in place. The mission was to be a one-way trip for most of those involved. But they had no choice. The plans contained in the archive were a beacon of hope, perhaps the only hope that could defeat the Empire's terrifying new weapon. The assault on Scarif began with a sudden, overwhelming strike. Rebel ships dove into the atmosphere, breaking through the thick clouds and over the deadly terrain of the moon. The tropical forests, once teeming with life, were now stained with smoke and the fire of war. The Imperial defenses were relentless. The Empire's fighters scrambled into the sky, intercepting the rebel ships with brutal efficiency. Despite the overwhelming odds, the rebellion's forces fought with everything they had. The sound of blaster fire and explosions filled the air as ships fell and rebels ran, dodging blaster bolts and rushing toward the data archive. But the Empire was relentless. The ground shook with the force of their assault, and every inch gained by the rebels was hard won. In the chaos of battle, a small team of rebels, led by a former Imperial officer, Captain Cassian Andor, was tasked with securing the archive's plans. Their mission
was to infiltrate the Imperial facility, retrieve the plans, and transmit them to the rebellion. They were not soldiers, not hardened warriors, but ordinary people willing to die for the chance to strike at the heart of the Empire. As the team breached the facility's outer defenses, they moved quickly, darting from cover to cover, avoiding detection by the stormtroopers who patrolled the halls. The plan was clear: reach the communications tower, upload the data to a transmission, and send it to the waiting fleet. But their every move was shadowed by the Empire's counterattack. The clock was ticking. As the team reached the communications tower, they knew there was no turning back. They activated the transmission, sending the Death Star plans toward the waiting fleet in orbit. But just as they began to transmit, an alarm blared. The Empire had tracked them. The remaining rebels fought fiercely to hold off the Imperial forces, buying enough time for the plans to be transmitted. But it was a battle they knew they could not win. With the facility collapsing around them and the Imperial forces closing in, the team made their final stand. Explosions rocked the base, and the tropical moon was lit up with fire and smoke as the Empire's forces stormed the facility. One by one, the rebels fell. The price of the mission was paid in blood. But the Death Star plans were successfully transmitted to the rebellion, carried on the wings of sacrifice. The heroes of Scarif had done what they set out to do, but not without cost. By the time the transmission was complete, the team was gone, sacrificed to ensure the future of the rebellion. As the battle ended, the moon of Scarif was left in ruins, its beaches and forests now scorched by the explosions of war. The heroes who had fought and died here would never be forgotten. Their names would live on in the heart of the rebellion, and their sacrifice would be the spark that ignited the galaxy-wide war against the Empire. The rebellion now had what it needed: the Death Star plans. And the Empire would soon realize just how dangerous the rebellion had become. But for the men and women who gave their lives on Scarif, their mission was complete. They had set the stage for the rebellion's greatest hope, and that hope would not be extinguished. The fires of rebellion burned fiercely across the galaxy, but the rebellion had long lacked the one thing it needed most: unity. Scattered cells, isolated and struggling to survive, had been fighting for years without a common cause. But with the stolen Death Star plans now in the hands of the rebellion, the galaxy would never be the same. The transmission of the plans had been the catalyst. The holonet had broadcasted the schematics, leaking them to every corner of the galaxy. As the plans reached the farthest systems, a spark ignited. One that would ignite the galaxy-wide flame of defiance against the Empire. The transmission was a beacon of hope, a call to arms that echoed from starport to starport, from hidden outposts to the heart of Imperial control. Rebel cells, until now scattered and disconnected, began to coalesce. Systems that had remained neutral or silent for too long were forced to take notice. The Empire's iron grip was not invulnerable, and a single spark had lit the tinder. Across the galaxy, from the icy plains of Hoth to the dense jungles of Onderon, the message rang clear. The time to rise was now. The holonet leak had sent shockwaves through Imperial space, and the Empire could not silence the rising tide of resistance. Star destroyers, their massive silhouettes cutting through the stars, were now rippled by holoflares, signals from distant worlds where defiance was taking root. The once unshakable power of the Empire was now being chipped away, piece by piece, as rebel cells communicated in secrecy, galvanizing one another with the stolen Death Star plans. On a small, forgotten moon, a smuggler's network saw the transmission as more than just a political statement. It was a rallying cry. Through encrypted hololinks, They passed the message on, sending encrypted signals across the galaxy, and within hours, dozens of factions rose to answer the call. Long-forgotten freedom fighters began to emerge from the shadows. Armed with makeshift weapons and hope, they began to make their presence felt. The galaxy that had been dominated by the Empire for decades was now witnessing the rise of a true resistance. The impact was immediate. A previously unknown rebel cell on the Outer Rim, led by a seasoned officer, took advantage of the confusion to launch a successful raid on an Imperial supply depot. The Empire had been so consumed with quashing rebellion on known fronts that they had neglected the far reaches of their empire, and it was here that the rebels began to strike. In the core systems, things were even more volatile. Senators who had once served the Empire, now disillusioned with its tyranny, began to speak out publicly. Some even openly defected, providing the rebellion with invaluable intelligence. The Empire's stranglehold on its political base began to weaken. It wasn't just soldiers or insurgents. Now, former allies of the Empire had taken up the cause of freedom. Even in the Imperial Senate, whispers of dissent began to grow louder, emboldened by the rebels' growing strength. But for every cell that rose up in defiance, the Empire responded with its signature ruthlessness. Planetary governors and Imperial officers were ordered to wipe out any signs of resistance with extreme prejudice. Entire populations were made to feel the wrath of the Empire's power. Mass arrests, disappearances, and public executions became routine. It was a tactic that had worked in the past, but this time it had a price. Every act of violence, every unjust death, only served to fuel the fire of rebellion further. Back in the heart of the rebellion, the leaders gathered to discuss their next move. The Death Star plans had confirmed what the galaxy had long feared. The Empire had created a weapon of unimaginable destruction. It was a threat unlike any other, and the only way to stop it was to unite the scattered resistance into a singular force, a force capable of taking down the Empire's greatest weapon. The question remained: would the rebellion be able to gather enough strength before the Empire discovered their growing threat? Could they build an army strong enough to take on the Death Star? And, more pressing still, who would be the one to strike the first blow? For now, the answers lay in the hands of the rebellion's leaders. They were determined to use this moment of hope to their advantage. The galaxy had heard their message, and it was up to the Alliance to carry it forward. But with the Empire's attention now focused on eradicating every sign of resistance, the road ahead would be fraught with peril. The battle for the galaxy had only just begun. The galaxy was stirring, and it would not be long before the Rebel Alliance, united in its cause, would strike back against the darkness that had ruled for too long. The rebellion's hope had been ignited, and now they would fight to ensure it did not die.